Last time I have introduced a 12-point list by the late Joanna Macy, which she called the holonic shift. And this list is, she created this list as a skillful means for inspiring the heart mind, the chitta, to open up and, to expand perception. And in that way, becoming available in a different way, in a different manner, simply by looking differently at what is happening. And doing that intentionally. Because perception itself is empty of a self, empty of an essence, and shapeable. And we can work with perception intentionally by, creating uplifted styles of perception, which can help us to restore a sense of sacredness and belonging to something larger than our little selves, or the little fearful selves, which get really alarmed, inside of what's going on right now. And to use these, skillful modes of perception, not in order to bypass what is happening, but rather in order to resource ourselves so that we can actually open more fully to what is happening. And there is, for example, the late teacher from Gaia House in the UK he was the resident teacher called Rob Bayer. He was one of the first ones who spoke about this, using different ways of looking, which result in different ways of seeing. And he's quite well known for his teachings on soulfulness. To look in ways which engender soulfulness. And he is quite well known for a book he wrote. It's called The Seeing That Frees. That's the only book which came out so far. And there's also a very comprehensive website with his teachings. And I'm going to write his name in the chat. Rob Obeya. You can Google him later on if you're interested. He was an artist, before he came to the Dhamma. He was a jazz musician. And then somehow, his journey took him into the Dhamma. But this kind of very creative spirit, this very, smooth capacity of the mind to improvise has stood him in good support, for being able to develop a teaching so different than many other approaches. I felt very inspired by his work. And then, at the same time, skillfully working with perception is really nothing new inside of Buddhism, in particular Tibetan Vajrayana, Tibetan practices, which have always been using, in particular, visualization as a means for encouraging the heart mind to expand and subsequently identify with super wholesome qualities. And in the Vajrayana tradition, those super wholesome qualities are presented as deities. I'm sure you've seen tankas, with peaceful, wrathful, and semi-wrathful deities, which are presenting different qualities of the heart, of the mind, and also, mandalas, Buddha fields. And through a relentless repetition of working with those visualizations, they produce expanded perception, which ideally, we then take into our daily lives after we have practiced that long enough, because In the beginning stages of the practice, one does dissolve the visualization at the end, dissolves it and takes it into the body as a blessing. But as we continue with the practice, there comes a stage when we no longer dissolve parts of the visualization, but we visualize ourselves, for example, as Vajrayogini in Guru Yoga, and then at the end, we dissolve the Guru and all of that into ourselves as a blessing, but then we stand up from the cushion as Vajrayogini and walk into our lives as her, with the particular qualities she embodies. So these sadhanas, they are combined with mantras and mudras and different outfits and different implements, dance, music, food offerings, all pulled together in often very complex rituals, which then produces in the performers as well as in the audience members a kind of transformation, at least temporarily, where the mind and the heart are very uplifted and the sense of me, my small self, is in abeyance for some time, and then we have a taste of a certain Buddha field, a certain way of being in the world, and then the skillful procedure has in mind basically then that this would rub off on us, and we would develop the confidence that indeed, we can embody those qualities. It's like a mirroring, which happens inside of those rituals. And I myself have experienced that many times, during these group practices around the Tibetan New Year, Losar, in the monastery of my Vajrayana teacher, Shechen Rabcham Rinpoche, in Kathmandu, his monastery, Shechen Monastery. And I want to just screen share in an image of the monastery, which might, help you to appreciate the dramatic, it's a really dramatic kind of skillful means, using drama, using beauty, using art to really overwhelm the mind to a certain extent and drag it into a different world. So that's the monastery of my teacher in Bauda in Kathmandu. And it's only a photo, but, it gives you a little impression of the kind of the splendor which is used there. It really overwhelms the mind to a certain extent in a good way. And inside the building, the walls, every millimeter on the walls is filled with paintings. There's nothing, no space left. It's pretty intense. And it's so different than the Theravada, which is much more straightforward and has different strength. So, in those group practice cycles, they last about a week each one, and was happening for 24 hours a day with different reciter groups keeping the practice going while, the others could go outside and, eat and maybe have a rest. It was about 300 monks and about 100 people audience together in that space for a week. And it got really kind of more and more intense, the energy in the place. And when one would leave the place or come, especially when you come back into the place, you have to do some little ritual, to enter again. And in that way, it was skillfully, building up. And then in the last day, there would be like a blessing ceremony where all of the blessings which have been, basically built up over this week are then basically given away. It's a very complex ceremony, and then people coming from all over the city and coming down from the hills, like thousands of people filling the courtyard, all of them want a blessing. And so, in what I noticed is because there was so much going on at once, there would be these long procedures of monks with different objects, and different medicinal substances and things to drink and so many different things, and crystals and skulls and many, many things. They would, put it on your head or put it in your mouth or put it on your forehead, and the mind can only give up. It's too much, it's too fast, it's too loud, and it's just so much going on. And then I really noticed how the mind was just opening and just surrendering, in a way I've never experienced before. Because, it was that kind of barrage of goodness, which coaxed the mind into a different space. And it was very, very unique, I must say. Yes. And so, this is how skillful means can support us. And, and I myself, I want to use skillful means, in particular imagination, in support with sensing, so that we can viscerally connect with the fact, that we are always already embedded in the web of life. To get this gut feeling, this visceral gut instinctive feeling back, because we have once, our species earlier in history, we have had those feelings when we were living really on the land, off the land. But we city people, we have lost that visceral knowing. And that's at the root, I think, of the polycrisis, because we have developed systems which are disconnected from the limitations of planet Earth. And because, we can't really figure this out with the head, it needs to be known viscerally. It needs to be known with the gut. And I think there is, more and more teachings coming forth, which are speaking about that visceral part, where we need to, train ourselves to remember the capacity again. And I think that's, the main direction I'm going here on those Wednesday teachings, to try to bring about some skillful means and weave them together with the already existing Buddhist teaching to open up this memory. And as we are doing that, all that which is on top of it, the unmetabolized stuff of modernity, that will get mixed up, and that we need to work with that. And the Buddhist teaching is excellently, created for exactly that, to work with what's coming up in the body, feeling tones, mind states, and thinking process. Can bring us all the way through complete liberation from ignorance. So to have a deep inward feeling rather than a scientific intellectual understanding of our embeddedness. The intellect is the signpost, can help. But then once we really viscerally understand it, then we can inform our thinking through our sensing. And that's how it needs to work. And it needs to be from the ground up, not from the head down. So a visceral feeling is an intuitive knowing, which sometimes there is no rational explanation why we know it, because we know it with the body. And, let us now get to a guided meditation which can help us to engender this deep intuitive knowing that we are indeed, part of a living, intelligent earth. As we do on Wednesdays anyway, nothing new. but we need to repeat it many, many times, because it's very subtle. And, to gain the confidence is through repetition. In something subtle, it's through repetition. So please, find a posture you can sustain for 40 minutes. And allow the mind to drop into the body, into the heart. And sensing what you're bringing today. Are you exhausted, overwhelmed, anxious, tired? Whatever it is, it's all belongs. And rather than trying to have a different experience, we're just adding awareness, we are adding mindfulness to what is already here. What's already happening all the time, we just don't know about it. We just don't notice it because we are distracted. We have created such complex systems. And while we are sitting here, more complexity is spewing out from, artificial intelligence. All of these things are basically intensifying the rule of ignorance. So it's really an intense time. And in midst of all of this craziness, it still holds true that we need to viscerally understand that we are part of a living, intelligent earth in order to have the reality check, what really matters. It's eating, drinking, and breathing, first of all. Everything else is just comes afterwards. Needs to serve that truth. Otherwise, it's all messed up. It's all completely mixed up. So standing firm with earth and slowing down while everything else is speeding up, that's not an easy thing to do. But the right thing to do sometimes isn't easy, or often actually. That's why we need spiritual friends. That's why we need to be together. So we can support each other in doing this very subtle work, which looks like a bit of a nuisance, in the middle of the craziness. But that's what samsara is all about, and it always has been. It's just speeding up for sure. And sensing the weight of the body on the cushion on the chair, as the gravity of this planet gently holds us in place and feeding us everything we need in order to sustain the body. And doing what we can, to keep that relationship conscious. even there's like whole huge things on the way, you know, pulling people more and more into virtual realities and virtual companions and all kinds of crazy, crazy stuff. All an escape, you know, from the truth of embodiment. So to stay steady in the midst of all of that pulling in a completely different direction requires intention and practice. Just yesterday I watched a presentation, you know, for Dharma teachers on AI. It's really pretty concerning what's going on there. So, you know, letting it all drain out down into the vaster body of the earth, and with the in-breath, you know, breathing up the stillness, the stability, the vastness of the body of the earth we are sitting inside of. And we want to attune to, we want to align with, we want to be taught by. Because we know that our bodies and the body of the earth are one process. We are just a small cell in this vaster body, and we will never be able to know what it is, but we can understand how it works, intuitively understand it by attuning to it and having that intention and the respect for the sacredness of that mystery we are a part of. The earth, you know, as a living sacred scripture of what the Dhamma is. In direct experience. No need to go into a virtual reality. That, you know, the need for doing that is just simply coming from a need to control, because we can't control the web of life. But we can control our computer to a certain extent, as long as there is electricity and water to keep all of this stuff going. So sitting here, you know, in these bodies, or with these bodies, these flesh bodies made out of the elements, participating, you know, in the watershed where we live, participating in so many different locations of the planet through the food we eat, the air we breathe. And knowing about, you know, all of the injustices, you know, which are happening every moment, in terms of how this is all distributed on the planet in a way which is very heavily manipulated, by certain groups of people called the elites. And sensing into the aliveness of the body, which is the same aliveness which goes through all other forms on this planet, all other life forms, in different frequencies. So really viscerally sensing into that aliveness while imagining ourselves to be inside of this big body of the earth, which doesn't end at the ground but goes up many miles. The atmosphere is also part of the body of the earth. And by sensing into this aliveness, also with the knowing, that we are part of a collective self-healing mechanism of the earth. We can choose to attune to that, and I think that's what we are doing here on the Wednesdays. To tuning to that self-healing mechanism, to aspiring to be part of the immune system response, as all of these crazy things are happening also. These huge AI computer farms, or however they are called, using incredible amount of electricity and water. The cosmic hum, the vibrational quality of this aliveness is the way, how we can receive instructions on how to participate. And it's not, something which goes through the head, but we can, as we are doing this practice, we can see that our life somehow responds. By different things happening. Like in my case, the Earth Room happened, basically. It's a kind of a calling, which we can connect with on this visceral level. It sounds a little bit weird, but that's just how it was for me. And this collective self-healing mechanism, of the planet works through many people, to everyone in different ways, depending on their skills, their location, whatever. very individual responses are coming through in this mysterious way. And even if it's not clear yet, what it is for you, just opening to it. Like, listening to music in this way. Listening to the music of the unmanifest. And doing it as a prayer, to be a walking prayer. And then, as that starts coming through, then the challenges are also coming through, because as we are kind of coaxed in a certain way, our life, we need to go leave behind certain boundaries, certain assumptions of what we can or can't do. And this new capacity, springs forth from going forward through the fire of opening and getting cooked, getting cooked inside of that aspiration. And then, attachments and cravings get transformed into, the Brahmaviharas, loving kindness, compassion, and wisdom. By really consciously sitting in the contraction, directly experiencing it, not intellectually reflecting on it. That somatic, direct, visceral experience, that's, where the rubber hits the road. This is where the work is. This is hard sometimes. And that kind of in the Vajrayana, in the tantric tradition, that's in particular used, with, as I'm speaking about, using strong attachment as an inroad, to get that fire going. Which then, opens up into non-separation and full awakening, but only if we can go through it, if we can bear that intensity of the cooking. And feeling and sensing is the technology. Very simple. Very, very simple. Like looking like nothing much. But that's it. That's where the resistance happens, usually. And then, developing whole kind of artificial intelligence worlds, for people to escape into, artificial companions even. So crazy. It's like completely distracted from what really matters. Like playing with toys while the house is on fire. Unbelievable. And, using a lot of electricity and water, wasting that precious life force. Oh, yeah, that's really pretty unbelievable. And on the website, I have a prayer which I wrote when I opened the Earth Room, and I keep it updated. It's called Transition Prayer for Collective Sense Making. And I'm gonna read that now. It's a work in progress, of course, And it goes like this. Aloka Earth Room is a laboratory for inquiry on how to adapt, create resiliency, and become more attuned to the current cultural context of the Anthropocene, late stage modernity, Kali Yuga. To be a contributing force for cultural evolution, we need to embody new and ancient ways of being. This requires great acts of courage as we shed our old belief systems, programming, and stories. We recognize that the evolutionary force that puts the stars in motion is moving through us and is a dynamic, self-organizing process whose grace and guidance we can trust. Our vision is a future in which everyone knows themselves as part of a living, intelligent Earth. Our prayer is to create an imprint of lived possibility in solidarity with all life, in dialogue with the living planet, and in service to the collective transition. How do we become stewards in service of all life while walking the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path? I trust and surrender to the guidance of the Dharma, biointelligence, and emergence. I want to serve the letting go of old forms and emergence of the new until liberation from all suffering. And the central skill is staying open to sensing and feeling, so that this visceral knowing that we are part of a living, intelligent Earth can come back to us, can become available to us again. By letting go of all of the overlay, the distraction, the numbness, the fear, all of that stuff. And right now, as you're sitting here, and the mind might be quite at peace, and there's a certain openness by listening into the web of life all around us, sensing that difference between the contracted mind that wants something or doesn't want something, and the mind at ease with things as they are, to know that difference. So when we are, challenged and contracting again in fear or aversion or whatever it is, that we can remember intuitively the open mind, the possibility of the mind which is not contracted. And just being able to remember that for a moment, that's already enough. Do not get kind of carried away. Because it's a matter of time. If we can stay conscious, it's going to change again, because that's the way things are. They're constantly changing. We don't have to make it happen. We just need to be aware. We need to be mindful of that. Not getting hijacked into it, into identification. Just allowing it to run its course. And then, we even have skillful means like meditation instructions, which can help to steady ourselves, to show us different ways of looking and seeing, and helping us to cultivate a more sacred outlook, a soulful outlook, a sense of belonging to something so much bigger than ourselves. Being in this lineage of ancestors, doing our piece, doing our little bit to carry life on, to carry on responsibility for this planet. So future generations know how to live, what it means to live a human life with eating, drinking, breathing as the center. This non-separability at the center of everything. And the word religion, religare, means connecting to something much bigger than ourselves. And we can call it God, Dhamma, or whatever we want to call it, but connecting with the web of life is definitely a way of connecting with the sacred. And really noticing that without submitting to some kind of a discipline, we will not be able to connect with that freedom, with the sense making. And that's the paradox, of any spiritual practice. There needs to be a discipline in order for freedom to become at least temporarily available. And that's why, some people think it's too much work. Rather go to some AI world and have an AI companion and become more and more disconnected and lonely. And there's a sense of control, but then there's no joy. There's no aliveness. And there's no strength and love. So listening into that aliveness, like listening to music. Doesn't end at the walls of the room, it's all over, through the whole cosmos. We recognize that the evolutionary force that puts the stars in motion is moving through us and is a dynamic self-organizing process whose grace and guidance we can trust. So this is a skillful sentence to open up the mind and the heart. And letting go of that assumption of separability, which is at the foundation of modernity and this cultural paradigm, which is currently dying, because reality is demanding that. And we call it climate change. So being part of this vast cosmic drama, brings up a sense of sacredness and purpose, which is nourishing and enlivening. And we are not alone. But we're belonging to something We don't even know what it is. And we never will know what it is, but we can know how to more fully belong by tuning intentionally. Until we are so fully attuned that there's no more separation. Full awakening. And the Buddha Dhamma is one set of instructions how that can be cultivated. I trust and surrender to the guidance of the Dharma, biointelligence, and emergence. I want to serve the letting go of old forms and emergence of the new until liberation from all suffering.